Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to the School Manager Part 17. In this all-new episode from scratch, we're going to be designing this really cool exams, quizzes, tests, and assignments. We'll be able to do new tests. We'll be able to update. We'll be able to check for automatic duplicates. We'll also be able to go into transactions and create brand new transactions. All kinds of transactions for students, teachers, expenses, income. It's going to be a great training. You won't want to miss it. So let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining me. I've got a great training. We're going to be adding transactions. We're going to be adding quizzes to our application. It's going to be a fantastic training. We're going to make it all with this menu, just in the same. We've got exams, we've got duplicate, checking for duplicates, so many. We'll be able to load them on single click. We'll be able to check for that. We're going to be able to update, delete exams, and then apply them to the schedule. It's going to be fantastic. I've got so much to cover this week. We're going to be going over both exams and transactions, completing it all from scratch. This is a sample. I'll be putting this away. We'll be doing it from blank, just as we do each and every week. I really do appreciate you staying with me, especially on this long series where I'm trying to pack so much value into an amazing application so that you can create your applications. I just ask a few things, if you can, to help us out. All do is just click the like down below. That helps the algorithms and helps us out, puts that video in front of other people so that they can learn about it. Also, if you can click that subscribe, and don't forget to click the notification. That'll ensure that you get those alerts in your email each and every Tuesday when I bring these for you for free. And of course, comment below. I'd like to know your thoughts, your ideas, and your feedback so that this application, like every other, can be amazing for all the people involved. So we do have this workbook for absolutely free. All you need to do is click the links down below with either your email or Facebook Messenger. Of course, if you like to get a whole pack of them together and not have to worry about downloading each individual one, I've got 175 of my best templates, all packed into a single zip file, along with an absolutely free library of workbooks and videos. So a single click to open the workbook, single click to view the training. It's fantastic. 175 for just $66. That's going to help us out. I hope you pick that up. All right, let's get started. We've got a lot to cover. This is what we're going to be making this School Manager. Exams and transactions. Basically, we'll be adding new, updating, and deleting exams. Same thing with transactions, new transactions, updating, deleting. There's a lot of similarities, so we're going to be able to use that. This is the sample, so I'm going to save this and I'm going to close it. We're going to go right back where we left off here. So basically, our exams is absolutely blank. Our transactions is absolutely blank. So we've got a lot to cover. Let's get it done. So what first thing I want to do is basically just copy this, at least copy the first column here, column C. That's what I want. I want to duplicate something like that. And also, we're going to do probably row 1 as well. And we're going to put that into exams, also in columns. So that's going to bring us both the menu and the column as well. Okay, so why don't we do the top row too, and then we're going to do the bottom row. So I'm going to go back into the classes here, and then we're going to do the same thing for the top row. At least this section here, this particular section is all I want to copy. So I'm going to copy that first row here. We can remove that button if it comes up and paste that into exams. We don't need this button, so we can cut that out. Okay, so here we're going to have basically all I'm going to do is just do the same thing here. Just copy this. This is just the School Manager. This is what we're going to put the title of. So I'll put that right up here. Then we're going to have a subtitle, and that's going to be similar to what we also have put in here. So instead of classes, of course, it's going to be exams. So inside there, I'm going to paste that in there. Not that one there actually, but this one here. Not both of those. This one, just those two here. And then just that column, row 2, is what we're focused on here. Going back into exams. There we go. And just paste that in there here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to need to increase this. We don't need that. And then this one's going to have something unique. Of course, it's going to be called exams, not classes, but we can copy this one right here so we can have the same size, just as we do, and have some consistency. This one, I want to call this exams, quizzes, and also tests and assignments. And then I'll put a logo there too, assignments. So that's going to be the title, this little bit longer title, because we've got there's a lot of possibilities here. So we'll stretch that out. Then we'll add an icon as well. So we've got the right size, and I'm just going to add that. Let's bring in that assignments, and we'll also update the columns associated with that. So column D will be a smaller column, so I'll bring that in there. And then also column C, column E, then F, then we'll size those accordingly. But first I'll just put a background, a consistent background. I'm going to drop this down. We'll be doing a lot of formatting. So I'm going to put it that same gray format that we've been using. This is the same gray, consistent with our theme here, and then I just want to bring this out here a little bit so we can have consistency all around. That's fine. All right, so we've got exams, quizzes, and tests inside. We'll be putting in a logo here, but let's fix the menu. Notice this is not classes. So first thing what I'm going to do is ungroup that. Actually, let's go back there. Let's go ahead and ungroup that. Be careful you don't click on that. I'm going to ungroup that, and then we'll go ahead and work with that, and then we'll regroup it. Classes, of course, we're not going to set that format, so let's go into the format here. That shape fill is going to be just that standard black, and then the font is going to be non-bold, and it's going to be set back to white. Okay, so we want that, that's fine, but the actual exams, what we're on, we're going to change that differently. That is actually going to have that blue font that we're working with. It's going to be bold. It's going to have that background, that white background, so we can differentiate between that. We can remove this specific icon for the exam. This is that white icon. We don't need that, but we're going to need the blue one, which we'll bring in. I do need now a white classes, so we can cut this blue one. We don't need that, but I will need one for classes. So all we need to do is just go back into the classes. Let's go, actually, I need a white one for classes, so the schedule contains that. I want to copy this icon only, Control C. We're going to go back to exams. I'm just going to place that directly in here and then bring that up to classes. Okay, we'll bring this up a little bit, this menu item up a little bit. There's a slight separation. I like that, and then we'll go ahead and line everything up. So now all we need is the exams icon. So I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to insert a picture here. And then I've got that saved up here. Let's see, in this specific folder here, that's the one I'm working on. We're going to need this check mark. We're going to probably need this folder. We're going to need this payment here, but this will go into the payments. But I'm just going to focus on these two because I want to be able to browse and attach a specific exam. So I'm going to use the folder, which I need in white, and the check mark, that is our exam. So I'm going to insert that. Okay, we can actually make these smaller, and then what we'll do is we'll just make those 0.2 or something like that. I do want one bigger, this one, so I'm going to Control D, duplicate that, make that a little bit bigger. So let's just say 1 inch too big. So let's go to 0.5 here, and that's going to be our up here. All right, good. I like that there. Now we'll just bring it down a little bit. This folder I'll use a little bit later on. This is going to go here. All right, now we've got our menu set, but I want to make sure that we call this name exams, right? The name of that is very important because when I click on it, it's got to go to the sheet. So if I change it here, if I try to changing it here, it's going to go directly to the button already called that name. So if I look, it's going to go right the exams. So how do I edit this? Notice it didn't change. Well, I'm going to open up the selection pane here and change it directly here, exams right here. Okay, that's going to, now we've got two. So now it's correct. So now all I want to do is just simply make sure everything's lined up. So I'm going to use my selection to here. I'm going to line all the icons up to make sure they're all lined up. Then I'm going to group everything here, grouping them all together. I'm going to group them. I'm going to give it a name, call it menu, which is our standard group name. Then I'm going to also right click. I want to make sure that we go to size and properties, and I want to make sure that we're sizing, moving, but not sizing with cells. Okay, we'll bring it down a little bit, covering that up, making sure it's good. Okay, we just want to color that in black, make sure the size is there. So I'm the cell above it, we don't want that white gap. So we just want to color that cell there, this cell, and give it that black background. That's the same color. So now we've got our menu, it's looking good. We can go to classes, we can go back to exams, perfect. That's just the way we want it. We can close that out now. And we're going to use this folder in just a bit. Now we're ready to put in some fields. So let's add those fields. What kind of, the first thing what I want to do is I want to make sure that we can select an exam. So here, right here, E3, I'm going to call this select exam. So that's going to be our select exam field. We'll be able to select. Then I'll of course have some buttons here that we have up here. And what else do I want? I want to have the exam name. So I'm going to skip a row and put in exam name. So the next one, and then I'm going to skip a column here. They're going to use this column. G is going to be our spacer column. Okay. Actually, before we do that, what we want to do is Control Z. There we go. I want to make sure that this is grouped here. I'm going to group those two, line those up and group them. Then I'm also going to set them because as we're working with columns, we don't want to size that shape, right? We want to keep that shape consistent. So move but don't size. Okay, so now we can continue. Now we can bring this column down without affecting it. Okay, so after exam names, I want to have a spacer. This is going to be the field. We'll color that in a minute. The next one's going to be the exam type. What is it? A quiz, a test. We have exam types inside our admin, so we can then add that in. Let me spell that right. Okay, so we have exam types, and then what do I want? I want the exam ID right here. So the exam ID is going to go right here, and that's going to be in case. So we're going to put that exam ID. We'll display that directly in. Let's just put it in. Let's say L2. We'll skip another one. That's better, probably. Skip another one, and have a separation exam ID, and then we'll put that in here. Okay, so I like that there. So what else do I want? I want the grade type. I want to know, is it a score or is it a grade? So grade type, right? If it's a grade, it's going to be A, B, C. If it's a score, it's going to be 100. So we need to differentiate between those two types. Skipping one again, I want to know the maximum score or the grades, maximum score or the grade. What is the max that they can earn? That way we can set a percentage automatically. Also, I want to be able to upload the exam. If we're going to email that to students or teachers or back and forth, we need to upload it. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this uploaded exam. Then we're going to have some fields here, and then I'm going to have a button here. So let's go ahead and bring that out. I think we're good. And let's put in one more. Let's put in an exam description. That way we can put a long form, exam description. And then we'll bring that probably all the way over to, let's merge and center. We'll do 2 rows, and then we'll bring it all the way over to, say, let's say L. Okay, so I'm going to merge and center that, and then I'll left justify it into the top. Now what we want to do is we want to color everything in white. So I'm going to hold down my control and then just select the specific fields that we want to format here. And this is going to be here. Not exam ID because that's not going to be editable, but just everything there. It's not going to be that many fields. And then what I want to do is I want to give it a cell style. Now we already have a cell style called field or field style. We can set that up here. That's our field style. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the control again for all of our labels and set the style on that. Exam ID. Now I didn't color that one, the exam ID, because that's not going to be editable. So then again, inside cell styles, and that's going to be our label. I'll double click on this. That'll double check the column, and that's the way I want it. That's looking good. And then I'll just go ahead and color this, format those cells, and then I'll do the border manually on this one because I don't want this to have a background because this is not editable. Only editable fields are in white. Perfect. But this one, I'm going to merge and center this probably all the way over to I, column I. So I'm going to merge and center this and then left justify it. And then we'll just give it another cell style here, which is field style or field is good. Okay, so I want to have a button here and I want to have some buttons up here. I want to be able to browse for that specific exam quiz and then have the name, just the name, not the entire file location placed here. And I'm going to have, of course, button sets up here. So let's save our work and let's add in those button sets. So the best thing to do is just simply copy what we have here, and then so we can copy this. So I'm going to copy this one, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and exam, and I'm just going to paste it right in here. Okay, and then the next thing I want to do, just in case I don't want to click on anything, so I'm going to assign the macro and then just going to delete whatever macro is assigned. That's going to delete the macro from every single shape inside the group. That's what I want. I'm going to do the same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click new class, and now what I want to do is I want to copy this group here. And then what I'm going to do is go back into exam. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to paste that directly there. And then also I'm going to right click that and then clear the macros from that, simply deleting all the macros associated with that. Okay, so we've got 2 groups. I'm going to go into my selection pane right here. I'm going to rename these. Instead of new class group, I'm going to call this new exam group. And also instead of existing class group, I'm going to call this existing exam group. Keeping consistent, right? So it's a lot easier in the program. You remember those names when it's consistent. Okay, so now that we have that, so we've got our names, so now we just need to update them and edit them. So this, instead of save class, we're going to call this save exam, as you can figure. And then also what we're going to do, instead of delete class, we're going to actually delete exam. Keep putting the E at the end of that, but there's really no need for that. It's force of habit in typing. We'll drop this down so we can see the other one, and then we'll just call this new class here. Instead of new class, new exam, how about no E at the end of that? Okay, so delete, I like that, that looks pretty good. Okay, so we have our shapes, we've got everything. I want to add one more button, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy just the button here, make sure we're not duplicating it, otherwise it's going to keep it inside the group. We don't want it inside the group, we want it outside the group. So I'm going to do Control C and then Control V. It's outside the group, and we're going to call this Browse for Exam. So this one's going to be called Browse for Exam. That way we're going to be able to browse for exam. And once we do that, we'll be able to email and so forth. So let's set a size to this, 1.2, let's say 3. Not quite big enough, so let's try 1.3. All right, I like that. That's pretty good. We can actually make it a little bit more. We need room for the icon, so 1.5 should be sufficient. I'm going to put that icon here. I'm going to center that. I'm going to bring the icon to the front, which is this one right here. I put that on my quick access. I'm going to line those up vertically, and then I'm going to group them. And then every time we group, we reset it, size and properties, going back into the properties, making sure we don't size that shape. Click OK. All right, so we're going to assign a macro to this. We're going to create that macro. And what that macro is going to do is basically, we can reduce this font. We can reduce this column. We don't need this here. So basically, I want to actually have pretty much the same width, let's say 4 here, and also the same width here so that we're consistent. 4 here. So when I browse for that, I want that name associated with that to be placed right in here. And then I want these at the top. I want these actually at the top. And then these are, remember, if you remember these, only one of these button sets shows up at a single time. So we can put them right on top of each other for now because they're not going to show. So center those and then just bring those up a little bit. All right, I like that here. Bring everything in consistent so that everything lines up on the right here. And we'll do the same thing for here. So we've got a nice little form. It's looking really good. Now we're almost ready. So again, saving our work, almost ready to write the macros. We'll color this green. That's not going to use too many of those fields, but there are some things that we need to keep inside the admin section. And what are those pretty common things? So what are we going to do? Well, the first thing inside, let's say, when we're going to select an exam, let's bring this out a little bit. If we select it from an exam on a drop-down list, I want to make sure that we know what row is associated with that, with the database row. We're going to have all that information saved inside of database. So I need to know what row based on the selection. I also need to know what row based on an ID here. So we need two different rows. That means when they select an exam from the drop-down list, assuming that the correct database row, and that would be the row that's stored in the database, which we'll be creating shortly, I want to make sure that that row, if they put something incorrect, there'll be an incorrect row or blank, and we want to know that. So this is going to be the entered exam name database row. It's kind of a long name, but it's basically the name that's been entered here. I think we reset those incorrectly. Let me update that. That must have been don't size or move, so we need to update that. Because notice we want to make sure that they do move but not size. Let me right click that and reset those size and properties. Remember, moving but not sizing. Okay, so into the properties, say read moving but not sizing. Okay, because otherwise it's getting annoying. All right, so we've got our work. So now that's what I want in here. But what else? I also want to know if it's been a duplicate name. I don't want to have two exam names the same. So I want to know a true or false duplicate name here. And I also want to know the row, the database row, same database where the exams are going to be stored. But I want to know that row based on whatever ID has been entered here. So this is going to be called exam ID database row, and we'll have a formula. And then also I want the next exam ID. That's going to be it. That's all we need. It's going to be relatively simple. So I'm going to color those differently, just as we do in the other screens, and give it that yellow. That denotes that there's a formula, so we can easily differentiate between that. Okay, so we need to create a database, and we need to update this. So let's do the database right now. We're going to use data mapping. If you're familiar with data mapping, we've been using a lot. All we do for data mapping is we take a screenshot of it. So I'm going to do just that. I'm going to take a screenshot using my screenshot. And I'm going to make sure to include the columns and the rows. So we're going to, once I have that, I'm going to copy that right here. Then I'm going to go into the database, and that's going to help us create our database. Exams database. Make sure you have your database in your form. In the next sheet, it's much easier to rotate. So we're going to put that mapping here. I'm going to put the header here, and inside row 3, I'm going to put those column headers. So the first thing we're going to put is exam ID. I want that. Then the next column, I want the exam name, and also I want the exam type. We need an exam type to know. That's going to help us once we put in the tests, and we'll know that. So exam. Put in exam type. So once we have that, the next I also want to know the grade type. Grade type, is it grade or score? So we have to have that. Also, then I also need to know to make sure that what is the max score. Put in max score. And after that, we have to put in the exam, the file name, exam. We'll just put in exam file. And then next up, I want to put in whatever details. Remember, we put in some description or details. Let's put in the description here. So we've got that. That's all we're going to need. Now we need to map it. I need to know what cell. For the example, the exam name is going to be in F5, and the ID is going to be located in L5. So we're going to put in that exam ID. That exam is located in L5 right here. And also I want to know the exam name that's located in F5. Next up, we also want to know what the exam type should be. What is that? Exam type, I'll make sure to put in type in the field. And that's going to be in I5. So I5, we have that. Okay, so that's it for row 5. But what about row 7? Row 7, we have grade type. That's going to be located inside F7. And then next up, I want to know the max score. That's I7. Last up, the exam file name, that's going to be F9, while our exam description is going to be located in E12. Okay, so that's it. All I do is just going to color that. I'm going to center it, color it gray, just put a borders around it, and then color it gray. Okay, good. So we've got that there. And now all I want to do is give it a name. So we're going to call this exam database. Nobody's going to see this, so we really don't need to make it pretty. I'm going to merge and center that here. And then also I'm going to make sure that we have those just colored, just give it a color. Any kind of color is good, just so it differentiates the header, so it's something easy to see. Okay, we've got that, putting borders around it. I'll double click all the columns to resize them accordingly. Now good, that's it for our database. We don't have L5, double check L5 exam ID. Exam name located in F5. We have exam type located in I5. F7 is going to contain our grade type, while our max score is going to be located in I7 here. Exam file F9 and also E12 is going to be located. All right, so we're good to go on that. That's it. We can delete that. We no longer need that. We'll save our work. And now what I do is I'd like to create a named range for all the data. That's going to really help when we clear out those contents. So the best way to do that is just to highlight those. And that's going to include the exam ID. In fact, I'm going to include this search because when I click new, I want everything to be cleared out. Best way to do that is hold down the control. Select the first cell, the second cell, the third, the fourth, even if it's a merge cell, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to call it a named range. I'm going to call this exam data. Now it's not going to show up directly, but as soon as we click out of it and then we select it, we're going to be able to see it. But we do need to update it, or at least double check it. Notice how the merge cells didn't necessarily take effect. So we do need to make an update for merge cells. That's no problem. In the formulas, we'll go into the name manager. I'm going to bring it over here. Exam. I'm going quick because a lot of these things are repeats. You know, if you've been through the series, a lot of them. So a lot of you have heard this before, but the repetition will help, right? Sometimes, doing these over and over. Okay, so now let's take a look at it. We see our first merge cells located on F9 all the way through I9. So we need to make sure in our named range that it's also F9 through I9. So let's take a look in here. I'm going to bring this out a little bit. I'll zoom in a little bit. So F9, all we need to do is the control and then change it to I9. And then just make sure that we use F4, and that's going to make it absolute. Okay, the same thing we're going to do for our description here. It's going to go from E12 all the way through L13, E12 through L13. So putting a colon here, L13, using F4, going to make it. So then we're going to click the check. We're going to tab out, tab back in here, and double check to make sure that the dancing ants encompass all of that data, which it does. Let's take another look at that. There we go. Okay, I like that there, all the data. That's going to help us out. When I need to clear those fields, I can use one line of code, very simple line of code to do that. Closing that out, okay, we're good to go on that, and that's called exam data. All right, so we've got our names. We've built this form out very, very quickly, very, very easily. Let's start writing our macros. I want a single macro that's going to allow us to click on there and browse for that form and have that name appear here inside exam. So how are we going to do that? Well, let's go inside our module here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to create a brand new module. It's going to be called exam miscellaneous or exam macros. So I'm going to right click here. I'm going to insert. I'm going to insert a module, and then I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to go into properties here, making sure we name it. I'm going to call it exam and then macros. Anything is fine. And the first one I want to write is that browse. So I do want to be able to browse for a specific exam, quiz, or test, or whatever. So we can write a macro sub exam, and then we'll underscore browse to add. Okay, that's going to be good. So that's all we need to do, and now we just need to write a little bit. So we're going to dimension the exam path as a string. We need to know the current path of it, and I also need a new path. Why? Because I want to copy that to, this is going to be a shared folder, right? That we're going to share this application with many users around the world, so we need to make sure it is in a central folder and that that folder is shared with all the users. So we already have that folder, but so new path as a string. So what I want to do is I want to copy it from its existing path and put it in that new path. And I want to know the application location as a string. That's the current location of the application. We'll double check that. We've been over it before. So those are the strings. And also what I want to do is I want to run a macro. That macro right in here in the admin miscellaneous, I want to check to make sure admin app folder. I want to check to make sure this app folder is existing. What is that? Just to double check back inside the app information. We go into the general information. We see that we have application settings here. This one right here, this is called app folder. We need to make sure that this, not only does it exist, but it is correct. And we have a single macro to run to make sure that it's correct. So to do that, we just run that little macro. Okay, so back into exams, and then we're going to go back into the code. We're going to run this macro, and all this macro does is double check to make sure. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to close out of here, and I'm just going to paste that in here. Run macro to check for application folder. Okay, great. So once I've got that, now I'm ready to do that. So I need to run one more check just to make sure. If, then we have here in brackets app folder, that's our named range that we already have folder here, put then brackets around, is equal to empty or nothing, then exit sub, just to make sure, right? We need that app folder because we're going to be copying that file, whatever its current location, into the application folder, into a specific folder called exams. So that way it's available for everybody. It's really great. Okay, so now we're ready to do it. So we also wanted to mention, let's do one more dimension. I want to do the exam file as a file dialog. Dimension, exam file as file dialog. Okay, that's important because we're going to be using that. We're also going to be focused on the exam sheet. So with exams, I want to make sure it's the correct sheet. So I'm going to put a dot and then the IntelliSense comes up so I know I've got the correct sheet name. So with exams, I'm going to set the exam file. It's going to be equal to application dot file dialog right here. And what do we want to look for? A particular file. So that's the first one. If we look, we want a file picker. That's the first one. So with that, we're going to set that. So now with exam file, we can do some things with it. Wait, what do I want to do with it? Well, the first thing what I want to do is I want to set a title to that. And I want that title to be select. I guess we could put an exam, quiz, test, or assignment. And also in this particular one, I don't really want to add a filter. I think that they could be pictures, it could be Word documents, it could be PDF. Who knows? Who knows what they're going to add? So I'm just going to let them add everything. So I'm not going to put any kind of a filter on it here. So allow multi-select, I'm going to put that as false because we only want it to be a single file at a single time. And also what I want to do is if for some reason they click the cancel, nothing would show. So if .show does not equal -1. -1 means they have found they've selected something. Then go to no selection. I want to skip everything else. So all the way down here, I'm just going to put no selection and then make sure we put that colon so it knows where to go. Okay, so no selection and then go to no selection. All right, so assuming that they have selected something, I want to put that inside of a string variable. So exam path, which you've already created, is going to be equal to here dot selected. In this case, the select item is going to be 1. So we've got that in file. Okay, so that's end with. That's all we need to do with the exam file dialog. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to determine the app location. We've already have that in a variable. The app location is going to be equals app folder. Okay, that's it. That's all we need for now. So next up, we've got that into now directory. We're going to set the application. Let's put the comment here. Set application folder location. Okay, so now that we have that, I want to check something. I want to check to see if the exam folder is in there. If not, we need to create it. That means a special folder just for exams. So if directory app location, okay, in this case, and exams, we can also add it on the above too. That's either way, exams, quotation, in this case, .vb directory, and we're checking for that directory. I want to know if it exists or not. If it equals empty, then we need to make it, right? Make the directory, because that means it doesn't exist. So all we need to do is just copy this here, and then because it doesn't exist, make it mk directory. In this case, what is that? That's all we do. Just going to check to see if the folder exists, that exams folder. If it doesn't, then make it. Okay, so now that we know it's there, it's made. So now all we need to do is create a new path for that. So we just need to copy that. So what is the new path? The new path is equal to, again, the applications and exams, and also want to know the name of the file. So and we're going to put a backslash here in this case. And what is the name? So it's going to be the directory. I want to know the name of that file. It's going to be the name of the exam path. That's just the name of the file along with the extension. Okay, so now that we have the new path, all we need to do is just use file copy. File copy is that, what is it? Well, first one is the exam. It's the source, the exam path. That's the source. But what is the destination? It's the new path. Exam path, new path. Now we've copied it over here. Okay, great. So now we've done everything we need. All I need to do is just put the name of that file located right here into F9. So let's do that right now. Dot range, we're already with dot range. Dot range F9 is going to be equal to, all we need to do again is just simply here, the directory of the exam path. It's still that. That's it. That's all we need to do. And then end with, and then no selection. Okay, so that's it. That's all we need to do. That's our first macro. Let's save our work. Take this particular macro that we just created and assign it to that button, that icon as well, the group in itself, and then we can check it out and see if there's any issues. So we're going to assign the macro, paste in that macro, click OK. Now what we're going to do is browse for exam, variable, new path here, New. Nice, Randy. Nice. I know everybody saw that but me. Okay, now we'll just select on the button. We'll browse for a file and click OK. All right, that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. We're good to go on that. And now we are ready to write the rest of the macros. All we need to do, let's update this. I like this a little bit better. I want it all the way along here. Format those cells and then just change this border all the way to a solid border here, here, and no border here. Okay, so now we've got that. It looks really good. That's exactly the way I want it. Now let's write the rest of the macros so we can save, update, and delete the exams, quizzes, and assignments. All right, now we're going to continue inside the VBA module. We're going to write some additional macros. But first, I want to dimension statement for all the macros. So we're going to dimension the exam row as long and also the exam column as long. Also, we're going to need to run our advanced filter. So we're going to need the last row as long and also the last result row as long. Okay, that's it. Now let's write some macros. So what do I want? I want, let's try exam save and update. It's going to be the same macro, save, update for either one of those. I also want one for sorting the names, right? So when I update or add a new exam, I want to sort it by name. So exam, and then just call it sort names. And also, I want add new, sub, exam, add new. And of course, we need load, sub, exam, load. That's important so we can load the existing. Once we have the right row, we can load it. And also I want the cancel new, and then we want delete. So sub, exam, cancel new to get out of the new mode, and also delete so we can delete exam. Sub, exam, okay, delete. Okay, that's going to be it for now. And so the first one we're going to work on is the save and update. Now we can bring this up here. I'm going to be focusing on this. We need to check to make sure there's required fields. So I want to check for a few things. One, I want to make sure that F5 is of course not empty, and I also want to make sure that there's a duplicate. We got to add some formulas in here. We're going to add those in just a bit because I want to add some named ranges in there. Also, it's going to help us with that. So why don't we do that now? Let's add in some named ranges and inside this. So we're going to need an exam ID, and I also want to add in a named range for our exam names, but that's going to be actually sorted, and it's going to be based on some results. So let's do the exam ID first, just as we always do here. We're going to start out here just as we always do, and I'll create a named range on this. So we're going to go into the formulas name manager, and we're going to create a new one called exam ID. That's fine there. And of course, we're going to use offset just as we always do. I know that we've done these so many times, but that helps you become memorizing. And we're going to go one row down, and then we're going to count A. Then what are we going to do? We're going to count everything all the way down here, including the headers. We'll go down to a large row, and then what we're going to do is we're going to subtract 1 because we want to exclude the header, 1 on the column, and then that's it. We're going to tab over and make sure that it encompasses the data, those dancing ants. Click OK. I want to create one more, but in this case, what I want to do is I'm going to run an advanced filter, and I'm going to put that advanced filter right here. So let's call this sorted. And in this case, there's not going to be a criteria, but we do want sorted because they're all going to be unique. Sorted exam name list. Okay, so I want those exam names, and they're going to be sorted based, of course, on the specific name. So we're going to put in the exact same. We want to make sure exam names. We're just going to copy that, put it right here. So our exam names, let's just say test here, is going to be starting out right here, and then it's going to go down here. So how are we going to do that? Well, what we want to do is just create a named range based on that, and then we'll sort the exam names. We'll bring them down here, all the unique ones here. Then we're going to sort them. And why do we want to bring them here? Well, we don't want to mess up the original data. 2, I want to sort them. And also, if we delete them, they're not going to have any names. So when we sort them, and anything blank is going to get all the way at the end, so then it's going to get excluded. And that's exactly what I want. So to do that, we just created a named range on that. So going into the formulas again, name manager, and we'll create a brand new one. And we're going to call this exam, and then just call it names. Okay, we can call it sorted is fine, so we know that sorted in case we want to add another one for the exam unsorted, which we can do. So again, equals offset. We're going to use the same type of formula, but this time, of course, it's going to be based on the header row, and then we're going to go one row down, 2 commas, count A, and then bring it also with the header row all the way down to a large number here, subtracting 1 to exclude the header, comma 1 for the column. Tabbing over to make sure it contains data and clicking OK. That's exam name sorted. I'm going to copy that because I'm going to need that as a drop-down list. I'm going to copy that and click OK and click close. Now what I'm going to do inside the exams, I'm going to take this and I'm going to put that as a data validation. So inside data validation, I'm going to put a list, and then we're going to put equals. So the user can select between those and then load it. So once they load it here, it's going to automatically based on this, right? So now what I want to do is I want to create an additional named range based on the exam names so we can get, based on this name, I want to know the row. So inside the exams database, again, inside formulas, name manager, we're going to look up the exam ID, the one we just created. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to create a new one. We can call this exam, and then we're going to call it name. That's it, just exam name, or name's just fine. And then what I want to do is just paste it right down here, but I want to change that column, that original column. We want to make sure we're counting the IDs. Column A, we want to count. That's the one we want to count. But we're going to signify which column we want to be present, which is column B, right? That's exam names. And so that way, if there's no data, they get deleted, they're still counted here. At least they're going to be counted and be showing up here. So now we can click OK and click close. And now what do we want to do is if we have an exam name in here, and then what we do is in exam, now I want to get that specific row. I want the row number based on this. So how do we do that? We can use, of course, we're going to use match. So we're going to use equals if error, and I'm going to run a match. So match, what am I matching? I'm going to matching this. I'm going to look it up. I'm going to based on the exam name, just the name, not the sorted. And then I want an exact match, so comma 0, getting that exact match. And I also want to add 3 because our first exam starts on row 4. So adding 3 is going to get that. If there's an error, I'm just going to put in double quotes. Okay, so that way we get 4, and that's exactly what I want. So the first one is on row 4. Left justify that. Now I want to do pretty much the same thing here, but I'm going to do it. I want to also need a row based on this, right? So if I put in 1 here, I want this to show 4 as well. So how do we do that? Again, very similar, equals if error. And then we're going to run a match, another match, but we're going to look up the value. Here we're looking up, we're going to base it on the exam ID. So exam ID, we want an exact match. Again, comma, if there's an error, double quotes, but don't forget to add 3. Let's add 3 to that because we want the row. So plus 3 because I want the row number. Perfect. So that's based on the exam. If that disappears, it's going to go back to blank. Just what I want. Okay, we also want to know if we have a duplicate name. I want to know that. And I want to know the next exam ID. So next exam ID is going to be equals if error. Also going to use if error. We're going to use the max formula, just as we always do. In this case, the max is going to be the exam IDs. I want the maximum number of the exam IDs plus 1. If there's an error, that probably means there's no data. So we're going to default it to 1. Okay, so that way it's going to show the next. If there's no exam IDs at all, it's going to default to 1. If I delete these, this will change to 1 so that the first one's always going to be 1. Okay. All right, great. So what if I want to put in, I want to make sure that there's no duplicate. So let's put this back in here and this back in here. And then what I want to do is I want to test for duplicates. I want to know, I want to make sure, I want to do 2. I want to use a conditional formatting here. So I'm going to merge instead of that. And I want to know if this is true, then I want this to show something. So let's take a look in here. So let's put something like a little warning so that, that people know that there is a duplicate name. So let's put this duplicate exam name found. Okay, so we can write it here. We can put a little bit smaller font. I'm going to put it bold. I'm going to put the font maybe a little bit smaller, so probably about 9. Okay, and then I'm going to raise it up so that it's high up. We can see it as close to that one. And now what I'm going to do is just simply I'm going to hide it. Hide it, basically change the font color to the same as the background. The only way I want it to show is if this is true. So if this is true, I want it to show. We're going to use conditional formatting to do that. So we're going to go into conditional formatting. We're in a new rule, and we're going to use a formula. And basically that formula is going to be if this equals true, then we want it to show in a certain color, and I want it to show in a font. So I'm going to format that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill it with probably this red color. And I'm going to put a font as bold, which it already is actually, and red, okay? Click OK. So now all we need is a formula. So as soon as this is true, it's going to say duplicate name is found. So false, it's going to change, or anything else is going to change back to green. That's what I want. So now all we need to do is fill in the formula that's going to allow us to do that. And so I really need 2 parts of the formula. One formula is going to be based on if their exam has already been saved, right? If this is a current exam, I need to check for if there's a current. Otherwise, if it's a new exam. So let's do that. So how do we know if it's new? Well, we're going to know is if B5 is blank, we know that there's no ID here, or an incorrect ID or something like that. We know that it's going to be a new, right? So when I click new, this is going to be cleared out. This exam ID, this exam row, which is based on that, is also going to be cleared out. So we know that if B5 is empty. So let's start that out there. Equals if, in this case, B5 equals empty, then we know it's a new. We know it's a new. So then in the new, all we need to do is just check if it exists. Then all I need to do is check to see if the exam name exists in the list, right? Because it's brand new. So we can do that with simple and match. So I'm going to wrap it around an is error. So if I want to find out if it's an error, is error. If it's an error, what kind of error? Well, I'm going to run a match, right? Match. And what am I going to matching? I'm going to match up this name. I'm going to match it on the exam names. Exam names, the one that we just created, on an exact match, right? If that's an error, this particular match is equal to true, right? That means it's an error. In that case, well, we can put false. Let's say false. If it's not an error, that means it exists, right? If there's no error, the match is found and it exists. So if it exists, I want to put true because there's a match. Otherwise, what do I want to put? Otherwise, I want to check also. Otherwise, it's false, right? Because it's not, right? So that is there. If it's found, so here we go. If the match is found equals false, that means there's no error. The match was found. Then I want to put true because there's a match. Otherwise, if it's false, meaning it is not a new, if it's existing, I want to do something a little bit different. If it is existing, I want to find that match. I want to determine if there's a match. And if there's a match, I want to know what row it's on. So here, if, in this case, we're going to run a match of what are we looking for? Again, I'm looking for F5. We're looking for that. And we're looking it up based on names. Here's the names. It's going to be our exam names. Running that one, an exact match. But this time I'm looking for the row. I want to know the row of that. Plus 3, the row of that, does not equal. So let's say we find a match, but it's not on the row it's supposed to be. It's not on B5. Then we have a problem. Then it's true, right? We found a match, but it's not on the row it should be. Then it's true. Otherwise, false. All right, great. So we've got that there, and we put that out there. All right, excellent. So let's take a look at that. Okay, and that's going to give us an NA. But what I don't want an NA, if there's any kind of an error, that means there's no match. So again, we have to run for that. So so let's do this. So we're going to check if there's an error. Also, it's also false, right? So again, all we need to do is an if error, in this case, also false. So we're going to do that also false, because if any error is fine, right? False. Okay, now we've got that. So now if I answer, so now let's take a look. So let's see if we have an existing. Let's put in test. Let's see test. But now what I want to do is change this ID. And now all of a sudden it's going to go to true, right? Because this test is on row 4. It's not on row 5. So automatically it's changed to true. Perfect. And if it's a new one, right? If we have a new one, why would it be new? It would be new in this case. It's also going to return true because it exists already, okay? As soon as we change it to something different, right, it's going to automatically hit. That's perfect. That's just the way I want. Okay, so let's continue with our macro. And so now that we have all of our formulas set, we can save our work, continuing on to the module for adding new. So we're going to check. I want to run those 2 checks. I want to run 1, I want to make sure that the exam name is go. And 2, I want to make sure that B4 is not, just to double check to make sure that they're not adding exam. So we can do that here. So with exams, that's the sheet we're working on, I want to make sure a few things. If dot range, in this case F5, that's where our exam name is located. If that is empty, equals empty, then let the user know. Message box, please make sure to add in an exam name. Exit sub, nothing we can do. Okay, also what I want to do is I want to make sure to see if there's true. So I'm just going to copy this and just make a few adjustments here. So in this case, of course, we're going to be focused on B4. If B4 is true, then we want to make sure to let them know that they cannot add. This will just put this, please make sure to add a, let's call it a unique exam name, a unique exam name. And then we could say duplicates are not allowed. The reason is because we have a named drop-down list, and it's really hard if we have 2 exams with the same name, we won't know which is which. Okay, so now that we've got those conditions, now all I need to do is determine, is it a new exam or is it an existing? Because we're going to use the same macro for both saving and updating. So we can do that using B5. B5, if it's blank, it's going to be new. So if .range B5 .value equals empty, then we know it's new. Then let's put in this new exam, else existing. So there's a few different things we're going to do if it's new or if it's existing. If it is new, we first need to determine the row. So that exam row is going to be equal to, based on the exam database. So we need to set the exam database, make sure we have the name right, exam database, we already have it there, sheet, exam database, A, first available row, so it's +1, first available row. Next up, what I want to do is I want to take that and the next ID and I want to place it in A. I want to do two things. I want to place this in A. What does that mean? I want to place it right here inside the next available one located in column A. And I also want to take it and I want to place it directly in here inside L5. So we're going to do those two things inside the macro now. So exam database dot range, in this case A and the exam row, we've already defined that above. Dot value is going to be equal to dot range, in this case B6, the next available ID. Next ID. Okay, so again, the second thing I want to do, I want to place that ID inside L. In this case, it's going to be L5. I want to place that ID. It's going to be equal to whatever we've just placed directly inside here. So all I need to do is just copy this and then paste it down here. I don't want to use B6 because that'll change as soon as we update that. So, right, B6 is going to automatically change. If we add 3 in there, it's automatically going to change to 4. So we want to add in whatever we just placed in A. So we're just going to call it that. We'll call it the exam ID. Okay, so once we've done those 3 things, that's all we need to do for new ones. For existing, I want to do one thing, and all I want to do is get that exam row. That exam row is going to be located directly here inside B5. So we're just going to copy that. Exam row is equal to B5. That's for existing exam row. Okay, so now that we have that, now regardless, everything we do after this is going to be for new and existing. Okay, so all we need to do, and then I'm going to run a loop using our data mapping. We've been through this many, many times before. Even in this, we're going to run a loop from, in this case, we already have the ID, so we don't need to start out at column 1, from 2 all the way to column 7. That's it. 2 to 7 running a loop. Whatever's in F5, putting it in the row, I5, and so on and so forth. We can delete this test data now. Okay, so that's good. The exam goes here, and perfect. Let's go in and add that code in. So for exam column equals 2 to 7, and then close our loop, next exam column. And then all we're going to be doing is updating that database. So exam database dot cells, we're using row exam row column exam column dot value is equal to dot range, and where's that range located? It's located directly in row 1 of the exam database. Exam database dot cells, again located in row 1 in the column variable, so it's going to be exam column. In this case, we're just going to do dot value. So all we're going to be doing is taking whatever's in there and placing it in there. So we're going to be place data in database. And then all we need to do is update these button sets here, right? We have 2 button sets here, one called existing exam group and one called new exam group. So we just need to update those to show one and hide the other. So to do that, we're just going to say dot shapes existing exam group dot visible equals MSO true, right? And also the next one, dot shapes new exam. It's not a new exam, so we need to hide that. Dot visible equals MSO false. Okay, great. So that's relatively it. That's all we need to do. And then what I want to do is I want to run a macro. As soon as we add or update, I want to run another macro, and that's going to sort those names. We're going to write that macro right now. So I'm going to copy this macro, and I'm going to place it directly inside, let's just say here, okay? Resort exam names. So that's exactly what I want to do. I'm going to save our work. And now before we do this, we're just going to add this here. Let's go ahead and add one, probably good. So let's just call this, get rid of this data. We don't need this. And let's just call it English final. I'm not calling it spelling because my spelling's terrible. Okay, so exam types. What are those exam types? We have those. Why don't we fill that out? Where are they located? If we take a look in the admin, we take a look into the grades and scoring here, classes and lesson. All right, so what are those exam types? Let's take a look inside. Inside the admin, we see here we have exam types. I believe we already have a named range. Let's take a look into the formulas and name manager called exam types. Here it is right here. We have a named range here, exam type. So does that type that I'm just going to add in there. All we need to do is just copy that and then escape out of there and then escape out of there. Then all we're going to go into exam and click on here and use a data validation. We're going to use a list data validation. So always list, and this is going to equal exam types. Paste that in there. Okay, I want to add just a little bit more while we're at it. Grade type. What's grade type? Based on the admin, grades are going to be either a grade or a score, a grade like A, B, C, or a score, right? Score like this. So I need to know which type it is which. So how do we do that? Well, we just add in, again, another data validation here, putting it in here, a list here. It's going to be equals grade or score. Now, if it's a score or I want to clear something out, if it's a grade, I'm going to show you. Score. So if it's a grade or score, so now what I want to do, if it's a grade, what I want to do is I want to have a drop down list of those grades. I want to have a drop down list of these grades. I believe we already have that, again, in the formula name manager. Grades, here we have it here. So I want to put this grades inside this automatically. So how are we going to do that? But only if it is. So that means, let's go back here, on any change of grades, if this is grade, I want to put the grades drop down list here. If it's anything else, I want to just put no data validation here. So how do we do that? Well, that's on a change event, anytime we change F7. So let's write that up right now. Okay, and that's going to be on the sheet. So we're going to go directly on the sheet, this exam sheet's right here, and I'm going to write a change event. It's going to be based on the change, on a worksheet change. So we're going to click worksheet change. We can get rid of selection change for now. I don't think we'll need it. So first of all, I want, just in case we make a large change, if target count large is greater than 1, then let's just do greater than 5 or something, or 6. Then exit. We don't really have any kind of change event that affects more than 1. Then exit sub. Okay, so if we make a change, what change? Well, again, we're changing based on cell F7. So we're going to change this to F7. And nothing, then I want to do something, right? So no matter on any change, on any type of change, regardless, the first thing I want to do is inside I7, I want to delete that. Whatever data validation there is, I want to delete it. That's the first thing I want to do. We can't add a new validation no matter what unless we've deleted one already. So range H7 dot validation dot delete. So that's the first thing. Now, only if it existing is a target, if target dot value equals grade, only then are we going to add in the validation. Then we're going to add it in. So how do we do that? Then range, in this case, H7 dot validation dot add. We're adding a validation. In this case, we're going to use XL validation. We want a list. Okay, so I'm going to put a list. And what kind of a list? And I want what kind of a stop of that? On this one, we're going to alert stop. So XL valid alert stop, right? I want it to stop in case it's not correct. Okay, otherwise then also there's no operator, and the formula is what? It's going to be equal to, that's simply 1, the grade here, the grades right there. That's all we need. I believe it was grades. Grades. Okay, oh, this is going to have to be I7, not H7, right? I7, we've got it right there, and I7. Okay, good. So let's take a look at that. Now we'll just double click on here, check that to make sure that the drop down list is the grades. And if we change it to score, right, then it's going to be nothing. All right, that's exactly what I want. Okay, now we can continue on with the rest of our code. So we know that inside the exams database here, we're going to run that. The first thing I want to do is clear out any results that have been here so we can run our name. So it's going to be after the first, and then I want to sort them alphabetically. So how are we going to do that? The first thing is inside our exams database. So continuing on with that macro, this is the macro we're working on. We can close this out. We're done for a while now. Inside this one right here, sort names, that's the one I want. So with exams database, or exam database, okay, that's the one I want to focus on. What are we going to do? First, we're going to clear it out. So J3 all the way through J99, let's just say 3 through J999, we're going to clear the contents of those out. Dot clear content. Okay, so once we've cleared out any previous results, we're going to determine the last row. So the last row is going to be equal to, based on A in the last row. If the last row is less than 4, then exit sub. That means there's no data. Assuming that we have data, we can run our advanced filter. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we're going to be deleting any criteria. Later on, we may add some criteria to this. Our advanced filter is not going to contain any. But if there is criteria already on the sheet, it's going to create an issue. So we want to delete any criteria. To do that, all we just use dot names, not name, and then it's called criteria. That's the name that's used when it's automatically created when an advanced filter is run with criteria, dot delete. But if it doesn't exist, it would create an error. Therefore, we wrap it in on error, resume next, and on error, go to 0. Okay, now that we've deleted any criteria, we're ready to run our advanced filter. So to do that, I'll use AutoHotkey to automate a portion of this. Remember, this is not going to have any criteria, so we can clear that out. No criteria on this. All I want to do is a unique list, and I just want to put it right here. Of course, the names are already unique. It's going to start out in A3, not 2. The last row is correct. That variable is correct. And it's going to go all the way to, in this case, we just need names. We don't need anything else, so it's just going to go run it to B, right? So we're not running anything else. And I want those results. Where do I want them to appear? I want them to appear directly in J2. So J2 is where our results are going to run. And unique equals true, although the names would already be unique. Okay, so now that we've run our advanced filter based on that, now all we need to do is determine the last result. So the last result row is going to be equal to, based on whatever's in J. So and that's going to be here, column J. So we'll make sure that the last results row is less than, if it's anything less than 4, then we'll exit the sub. Because I don't want to continue and sort if there's only one value. So if it's less than 4, then exit the sub. So all we need to do here is just write that up here. Again, this time we're going to copy this, but instead of last result, we're going to make this last result row. Okay, less result full. No need to sort. We can just exit out. Okay, but the next thing is I do want to sort that data. We're going to create it. We've already created a named range based on this. So all I need to do is then just run the sort. Now we've created sorts before in this application. So in order not to rewrite it, all I'm going to do is just Control F. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for dot sort because I've created it before, and then we'll just make the update. So I'm going to find the next one inside our project, not our module. Here it is right here. So all I need to do is just copy this, close this out, and then paste it down here, and then make the updates with the field. So instead of AA3, this is going to be J3. That's the one we're going to run. And then also I want to make sure it is ascending. That's correct. In this case, we're going to run it through J3 and all the way through, and then JJ in the last results row. See, a lot easier than retyping everything. J3 through last results, just make sure we have our variable right here, J3 last result row here, last result row. Okay, that's why it's handy to keep your same variables when you can. All right, so now we have that, we get last thing is apply. So we're good on that. So that's all we need to do. Let's save our work. Let's go ahead and add something. We can remove our test data here, although it's cleared out inside the macro. And then we can continue on adding it. So the score, let's say its max score is 100, and we have a skill manager, and let's just put test description here, and then I'm going to raise this up. That should be at the top here. And then we also want to wrap the text on here. Drop this down and wrap the text in this one. Okay, all right, so I like that. Now let's take a look here. I'm going to, again, save it before running our macro. And what I want to do is assign the macro that we just created, the save, to this item right here. So I'm going to hold down the control. I'm going to right-click it, and I'll click Assign Macro. Focus on exam, so I'll type in exam. And then we're going to look at Save Update. That's the one I want to assign. Clicking OK, checking for any things. All right, let's take a look. Our button appeared here, or the group, existing group. That's the way I want it. Let's take a look at our drop-down list. This one is perfect, English Final, so it appeared here just the way we wanted. Exam types, I don't think we set exam type, so we're going to set exam here. Let's call it, we call it exam. We're going to click on, hold the control, update. In this case, it's update. I'm going to assign the same macro this time, exam. In this case, again, save update, the same macro, both test and update, making sure we have the row, it's correct. Now we're going to click update, and we're going to make sure that it's loaded. Now we're going to take a look inside the exam database. We have the exam ID, exam type, score, max score, the file, and the description, and our sorted names. Okay, let's add one more and make sure they're getting sorted. I'm going to add one with an A. So I'm going to click new exam, but we need to create a macro for new exam. It's going to be really easy now that we've created a data. Now we've created a named range based on all the empty data here. We called it exam data. Do you remember here? It's exam data right here. This is the one we do. So all we need to do is use this named range to clear the content. It's going to clear everything out on our new one. So let's write that macro right now. We're going to call it add new. So we'll bring it up here, and then we'll do load after this so we can keep it in the same order. I'll add a space between each macro. Okay, so with the add new, what are we going to do? It's relatively simple. All we need to do is just focus on that sheet, again, with exams. And what I want to make sure that we are going to clear the contents, as I said, dot range. In this case, exam data, and we're going to clear the contents out. So dot clear contents. Okay, so now that we've cleared all the fields, again, I want to take these shapes and I just want to reverse them here. These are the shapes that I'm going to focus on, but instead of showing, I'm going to hide, and vice versa. So all I need to do is paste that in here, and then all I need to do is just change the MSO false to true and true to false on these. So this one goes to false. This one goes to true. See, true. All right, and that's it. That's all, very, very simple. That's all we need to do for add new, and all we need to do is just assign that macro to the button associated with it. So we can copy it, make it a little bit quicker. Go in here, and then right-click, click here, and then hold the control. Right-click and then assign macro, paste that in, click OK. I know I'm moving fast. We've been over this before. New exam. Okay, perfect. That's exactly what I want. All right, now all we need to do is add macro for cancel new, delete, and load. So when I select a specific one, I want to make sure that we are actually loading that. So how are we going to do that? Well, it's relatively simple. Notice we already have a row here. So all I need to do is determine this row, making sure that it is. If they enter something else, it's going to be blank, right? And then we know, making sure that this has a value. If it does have a value, I'm going to look on row 4 right here. Whatever's here inside row 4 in A, I want to place that exam ID in here. As soon as I place it here, it's going to assign a row right here. Once I have the row, I can load in all the data associated with that. So that's just what we're going to do right now. I'm going to make sure that, so we're going to do that on change. So we're going to go back into the worksheet change. So to do that, we're going to go inside here, exams here, and then we're going to make a change. But this time it's not going to be on, of course. It's going to be a different cell. If the user makes a change to F3, that is where I want to focus on that. So let's do that. If not intersection, I'm going to focus on F3 if the user makes a change, and I want to make sure that we actually have F3 is not, I want to make sure the value is not empty, and range F3 dot value does not equal empty. And I also want to make sure, again, I want to make sure that B3 is not empty. So B3 must not also be empty, and range B3 dot value does not equal empty. Then what I want to do, then we're going to load it, then run the macro. So it's going to be exam and then load. I'm going to okay, that's perfect. So we're just going to run the macro. Now all we need to do is write that macro. It's relatively simple. So saving our work, we're done for here now. Then I'm going to close this out, and exam load is the next macro. So all we need to do is just run that. So with the load, all we're going to do is with exams. The first thing I want to do is make sure that, obviously, just to double check to make sure that B3 is not empty. So if dot range B3 dot value, that's our row. That's really important. Actually, we want to make sure that B3 is not empty, just to make sure. So we just let the user know if it's empty, then to select a correct one. B3 value dot value equals empty. If it's empty, then write a message box. Let the user know to select a proper exam. Please select a correct exam from the drop-down list. Okay, and exit sub. Okay, assuming that they have the exam row, we can now assign exam row. Exam row is equal to based on whatever is located in B3. So exam row equals dot range B3. So all I need to do then is load it up. Now there's a few ways we could do it, but it's relative. We can go from 1. Because we've already mapped the data here, notice L5 I've already mapped, so all I need to do is then run it all the way through here, from 1 all the way to 7, and load in on our for next loop. So that's all we're going to do. Now that we have defined the exam row. Okay, so now we're ready to run our for next loop. So for exam column is going to equal to 1, 2, 7. Close our loop, next exam column. So we have it. So what is it going to be? So dot range, and where's that range located? It's going to be located on exam database dot range dot cells row 1 exam column dot value. And again, dot value is going to be equal to where? Simply in our exams database. Exam database. Dot cells, this case, the exam row. I'm going to pull that data back in. Exam row and exam column. Dot value. So all we're going to do is going to pull that data right back in. And then the last thing we do is just make sure that we update the button sets. It's existing button sets, just like it is here. So all we need to do is copy those groups of buttons here, and then just paste them right down here inside the exam. Right there. Okay, so that's it. That's all we have to do. We'll clear it out, clean it up a little bit, get rid of those extra rows, saving our work here, and now we can run the macro basically when we now load it. So exam. So if we click, we've already got add new, so all we need to do is double click here and load it in, and everything's going to load in here just the way I like it. All right, that's good. Let's add one more new one. Let's just add in a new one here. Actually, when we click add new, I'd probably like to select F5. So let's just call this Aimers exam. And then I will just do a type. Let's do a change the type up. Let's do a test. And then the grade type here, we'll do grade. And then the best score they can get is an A. And then we'll upload something, anything that we can do. Just icon, it doesn't matter. And then test that out here. Okay, and then save that exam. Okay, take a look in here. Now we want to make sure our drop-down list, notice it's now drop-down list has 2 items and Aimers is above that. So our sorting worked just right. They're now sorted and our named range is picking that up just the way we want it. We can now load it. So if we select on it, I'll move this button set over. It's a little bit too close here. So now we can do is our select Aimers or select one and automatically load in. Perfect. So all we need to do is cancel new and delete exam. So let's write those. The cancel new is simple. All I'm going to do is in one line of code, if there's any data located here in B, or let's just use this, the first one, J3, assuming J3 has a value, I'm going to take it as just I'm going to put it right inside here, inside F3. If there's no data at all, that means there's none, and they can't cancel out of the new. They need to add at least 1 first. So we're going to do that J3 in the exam. So cancel new is going to be very, very simple. So let's clear up these extra spaces. If, in the database, right, if exam database dot range J3 dot value does not equal empty. Then all we're going to do is place that inside the exam. Exams dot range, again, F3 dot value equals, what's it going to equal? Equals this right here, exam, whatever's in here, exam database. And that's it. That's all we need to do is cancel new. That's going to automatically load it. Just because we're placing it in F3, it's going to automatically load it. Very, very simple. So all we need to do is just copy this macro and then place that in the cancel new exam and cancel new. That's where I want to assign it. So right click on there, assign the macro, paste that in there, click OK, cancel new. Perfect. Last thing is delete. All right, cool. Then once we do delete, then all we need to do is transactions, but it's going to be super simple because we're just going to simply duplicate. So it's going to be really quick, and I'm going to show you some really cool tricks how to create these transactions super, super fast. Not nearly as long as it took us to do this. All right, so you've got to stick with us on this. All right, so all I want to do is just delete the exam. Relatively simple. We want to make sure that we actually have a row based on here, in this case B5. B5 is based on this. So I want to make sure that B5 contains a value. If it does, we set the row and then we delete it. In this particular case, this particular application, we are going to use share and sync, which will be coming in just a few weeks. In that case, what I want to do is I want to keep this exam ID and I want to clear out each individual using a for next loop, clearing out the contents because I do not want to make more than one change to one cell at one time. So we're going to run a loop from 2 to 7 and clear those out. So we do that just with a few lines of code right here. So we're going to focus on the exam database for the most part. So that's one good job. So first of all, we want to make sure they want to confirm that they do. If message box, are you sure you want to delete this exam? And then we'll give it a yes or no. And then it says delete exam, give it that title. So it's got the title equals VB no, then exit the sub. Then exit sub. So if they say no, then we're going out. Okay, assuming that they're not, I also want to make sure that of course, like we said, I want to make sure B5 contains a value. If it doesn't, we don't have any row to delete. So the first thing we want to do is check that. So if exams.range B5.value equals empty, then message box, there's nothing they can do because there's no row. Please make sure you select an exam to delete and exit sub. Okay. So assuming that we do, we can now take B5, put that into a variable called exam row. So exam row is going to equal to B5. Self-explanatory. Okay, so now all we need to do is run the for next loop. We don't need to specify a sheet, not necessarily, but we could if we want to. So let's try this with exam database. Okay, so with that database, what are we going to do? All I'm going to be doing is running a loop, as we mentioned, for exam column using the same variable. In this case, 2 to 7. I want to keep that ID in the place. 2 to 7. And then next exam column. So all I'm going to be doing is just clearing the content. So in this case, dot cells, exam row, comma, exam column, dot clear contents. That's it. Okay, that's it. That's all we need to do that. And then, of course, all we want to do is probably just run the rerun. I want to rerun the sort names, and I want to do an add new. So the first thing, now that we've cleared it out, I'm going to run the macro, this macro right here. So I'm going to copy that here. And then, so I'm going to drop that down here. Then what I want to do is exam and then just click add new. Okay, so we go into the new, so that's going to clear everything else out of that cell. So, or out of those cells. All right, so adding new clears everything out, sorting name sorts it. So saving our work, let's add a test one here, new exam, let's just do test here. That's the only thing we can assign a type. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to delete it in just a second. So we're going to save that exam, making sure that that test is located here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign the macro that we just created to this button here. Here, assign that macro to the delete. So we'll click exam and then look for the delete, which is here. Click OK. And then delete exam. Are we sure? No, that's good. Click it again. Are we sure? Yes. It deletes it. It clears it out, adds new, making sure it's no longer in the drop-down list. All right, very cool. We did that really quick. I know it's fast, but we've done them before. Now let's create this amazing transaction screen. And the easiest way to achieve that is just to copy what we have and then make the updates accordingly. So that's just what I'm going to do. I'm going to click copy here. And I'm going to go into our transactions, completely blank screen here. And I'm just going to select all, and then we're going to paste everything. Okay, that's going to paste everything, but we still have to make some necessary updates. First thing in this menu here, this has got to be increased all the way over here, just like that, and column. And of course, I'm going to then make that cell so we can make the updates on that menu. And then also we're going to resize this. We need to update this. This is going to call this transaction. So let's do that, and also upgrade the size. So I'm going to ungroup that first of all. We're going to be doing some formatting. So I'm going to drop this down here until we get all the formatting done. And then I'll increase this here, and we're going to call this transactions. So we're going to capitalize it and call transactions. Any type of transaction is going to go in here. Income, expenses, teachers, students, you name it. We're going to have it all. So we'll delete this. I've got an icon here, and I'm also going to copy the header over here. That didn't copy over, so we're going to copy this particular header here. I'm going to copy that and bring that over inside the transactions and paste that in here. And we have the subheader. We'll have an icon here and the same thing here. So now we just have to update the menu accordingly, and then we're going to update this. So we won't need this browse button, so I'm going to delete that here. And then also what I want to do is I want to make sure that we have updated the menu accordingly. So let's update that just like it is. So I'm going to, again, ungroup this just like we did last time. Then I'm going to take this exam. We don't need that here, but we also don't need the transactions, the white icon for the transactions. So we're going to remove that, but we do need the blue icon. So we're also going to redo this. I'm going to format this, set that shape fill to this, and then of course the font, we're going to take the off bold, turn that to white, do the opposite for the transactions. The transactions, we are going to make it bold. We are going to set to this default blue color, and let's select that again. For this transactions, we are going to make it bold, and we are going to make it this blue color, and then we're going to set the format. The fill is going to be white, and we're going to update the fill color to white. Now we're going to update the icon. So I'm going to do insert picture. I'm going to find that icon. This is the one I want, transaction payment blue. So I'm going to move it down here, reset it to 0.2, and then I'm going to duplicate it, Control D. So we're going to move one here to the transactions. We also need to pull that exams here as well. We need that one in white. We can get that from another screen. I'll increase this size just the way we have it. Then I'm going to hold down the control for the transactions. And of course, I'm going to center those, group them together. And always when we group them together, size and properties, and we want to move, but do not size in the properties right after we group them. Okay, in the exams, all I need to do is just go into another screen here, such as this, and then copy that icon for the exam. So I'm going to take this icon from the scheduling. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back into the transaction. I'm going to paste it directly in here, and I'll just move it up here. All right, so we've done our menu. It's pretty good. We just need to update the name here. Remember, we need to update the name on the icons, the new ones, especially the one in the menu. So I'm going to click on the selection pane here, and I'm going to double click this, and we're just going to make sure the name is exactly the name as the sheet name. That's important, transactions. So then when we click on that in the macro assigned, once we regroup it, we will regroup it. So let's click on here, transactions. Okay, so we're good to go there. And also we're going to close this out. We also want to clear any macros. As we see, we easily set up macros. So I'm going to clear the macro and click delete. Okay, so that clears all the macros from the transactions. And now what I want to do is I want to line these icons up just as we have done before. And there we go. Line them up to make sure they're. Also want to group everything together, grouping that, giving that a name, calling it menu. And you know after we group something, we need to do one more step, and that's go into the properties. And then, of course, we want to make sure to move but not size here. So once we've done that, we have everything correctly, just the way we want it. We can undo our selection tool. We've got our menu. It's all set up now. So we're good to go on that. We'll move it a little bit over so it lines up just right. And then we can reduce the column so that it's perfectly lined up. Okay, saving our work so far, we're going to make some updates on this. So what kind of updates are we going to make? The first thing I want to do is I want to go into the selection pane and update those names. We have the menu that's set up before. This group we can hide. So this group we can hide the header group. New exam group. This is not going to be called exam. It's going to call it transaction. So every instance of the word exam, we're going to change to transactions. We're going to do that also in VBA as well. So we want to keep it consistent. Existing exam group. Again, we're going to change this to transaction. It's going to rename those group of buttons. All right, so once we have done that, we can then update the fields accordingly. And now we can close this selection pane. And just to double check, we'll go back into the selection pane and just make sure we have all the shapes. We're going to show all the shapes, and that's going to show that group, which is fine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this one to the top right here, bring it to the top, and make sure that we've changed exam to transaction. So say we can abbreviate that transaction. And then also we want to do it here as well. Instead of delete exam, I want to make a delete transaction. And then also here, I'm going to move it to the back now, this particular shape here. Actually, let's do this one. This one here, I'm going to move it to the front of this one here so we can see it there. Now we can see it. So that's fine if we can see them both at the same time now. Of course, you know, once we update the VBA, they're going to be hidden and displayed only one at a time. Okay, so now we're going to change this. We're going to make some changes here, as obviously we're not going to have exams. And so the first thing I want to do is just use my selection tool. I'm going to move these buttons over a little bit. We're going to need a little more space on this one. I want multiple search. I want to search by transaction name, and I want to search by transaction ID. So that's going to be a little bit different. So first of all, we're going to change this to select transaction. And then I want something very, very similar here. I'm going to paste this over here, and then inside here I'm going to paste this, and then what I'm going to do, this one's going to be called enter transaction ID, and then they're going to put the transaction ID in here. So again, let's move these button sets over a little bit because we're not going to need them exactly where they are. Move them over a little bit. So this one's not going to have a data validation. We just copied and pasted that, so we can remove the data validation. In fact, let's highlight everything and remove all the data validation for now, and then we'll add some more later. Click OK, and then clear all. And that's going to add the data validation. So they'll put something like 1 or something. So what they'll do is they'll select from a drop-down list to load a previously saved transaction or enter a transaction ID here. That's what I want. So here they're going to put in the transaction name. Transaction, let's just do transaction name. And then also I want them to put in a transaction date. So we'll just put in transaction date here. That's going to be a date field. Transaction ID should go in here. That's fine. We'll keep consistent with that. And then also down here, I want to select an item, right? We have transaction items. What do I mean by that? Transaction, if we click here into admin transaction, we have a set of transaction item names. We have a named range, I believe, for that. So if we click on here, transaction, and then item, we tab over here, we see we've got the transaction item. It's transaction underscore item. We can add that as a data validation. And then what I want to do is after that, I want to put whatever the item and whatever the category was displayed on here. So how are we going to do that? Well, just a little bit updates here. So we're going to put in the transaction item here. Actually, we have no space for a transaction. That's fine. Item, and then here's going to be a data validation. So I'm going to delete that here. And then here I'm going to put in whatever that was. I'm going to put in a formula here, and I'm going to put a formula here. So those are going to be formulas. So what we can do is just change this to our standard background color here, not that. Here. Okay, so I want to put in the transaction item, so it's going to be a data validation. I'm going to select data validation here, and it's going to be a list. It's that same one we just saw, transaction underscore item. So we can select between all the transaction items. So here, actually, it's going to be data validation equals transaction item, not transaction. Okay, so now we've got it. Now we've got all the transaction items that we want here. So when I select a transaction item, I want to display that item type, and I want to display that category here. So I'm going to put in item type here, and I'm going to put in category here. And it's just going to be a formula, they're always going to be default. So I want to make this smaller. It's more of a label that we're going to use, and we'll do around 9 or something like that. I'm going to center that and bring it down to the bottom. It's here. So that's what I want, a little bit more space for the category on here. I'm going to use a index formula, index and match, to locate them based on the admin screens here. So we'll notice the item type is located here on CD starting in row 6, and then CE starting also in row 6 for the category. So we can use that and determine that. So inside the transactions here, we can use equals if error, one blank if there's an error. Move up here. So we're going to begin index. So actually we'll use indirect on this. Let's use indirect. So because we don't have named ranges for that. So we'll use indirect, and we're going to use admin. And of course, it's on the admin. And then where is it located? It's located on CE. Remember CE, if we look in the admin screen, CE here, CCD and CE. So that's what I want to do. So we'll do admin CE. We need to start that out with quotation marks. So start and end it, right, in quotation marks, so because it's an indirect formula. And what do we want? And I also want, it's going to be, we're starting in row 5 plus, right? So 5 plus whatever row. What row is that? It's a row based on the match formula. Matching. What are we matching? We're matching, we're going to look up the item value. Where's that value? It's located right here inside here, F7. So transactions, F7. That's where we can just use F7 in this case. We don't need transactions. We're going to match that. And what are we matching it based on? Okay, F7. And then what are we going to base it on? Based on the transaction item. Transaction item. We want an exact match. So we're going to look up that. And then also what we want to do, that's going to give us that row number. If we add 5 to that, so if it's 1, it's going to be CE, of course, and then it's going to be 1. So let's do that. If it's an error, then what I want to do, so in this case, we want A1, it's going to be true, right? We want A1 style. Then we can close it out. Then if it's an error, then we can add those quotes. Okay, so that way school fees, it's going to be item types fees. We actually do CD. This should be CD. The next one's going to be CE. We can copy this because that's what I want for the next one. Copy that, bring it over here. This one's going to be CE, and this one's going to be CD. Okay, because it is an income and fees. All right, let's center those two. There we go. We've got those indirect. So now as we change this, it's going to show the lesson, the teacher salary. Here's going to be expense and salaries. That's what I want here. Perfect. Okay, so it's going to come directly from here. So all teacher salary, let's put that in here. Fix that spelling. Okay, so I'm going to save our work so far. So every time we do, these are not going to change right here. So these are always going to be the same here. So next up, what do I want here? Of course, we need the amount. So let's put in the amount. What is the amount of that transaction? And then also, I want to know if it's going to be a student or a teacher, right? Sometimes we assign specific expenses or income to students or teachers, so we want to put that here. So student name, I'm going to put that here, and we'll merge and center that up to, let's say, H, and give it a little bit more space. So merge and center that, and then left of that. And then also what I want to do is I want to put in teacher. So I'm just going to copy, let's say, this here, and then put that down in here, because that's where the teacher is going to go. So I'm going to put in teacher here. And then I'm going to merge and center the rest of the cells all the way up until the end. And that's what we're going to put in our teacher. So left, and then I'll left justify that. And then we need some formatting styles here. So we'll just put in the white. I believe we can just do the cell styles and the field style. Okay, so the teacher is going to be here, and we have the student name is going to be here. We need some. Let's bring in, we'll bring in those a little bit down here. We don't need this one as big, so we can bring this one down, center that, and then we can bring this one a little bit bigger. We've got an amount here, so we can bring in that. All right, good. I like the way that that looks, and now what we can do is we can bring this also down too. We don't need this one. This is not so high. Okay, so the amount field, we need to update these here, so we can copy this here and paste the formats here. Paste special, and then formats. That's going to give us the amount field, and this is going to be an amount field, so we'll select on the amount. Okay, now we need to add in our data validation for both students and teachers. We want the full name, and we want them sorted so we can look. So I'm going to go into data validation here. I'm going to add, I'm going to click a list. And which one do I want? I'm going to use F3, and we're going to select that. So this one's going to be student, right? If we look down here, student name sorted, that's the one I want. Click OK. Also under teacher, I want to do something similar. Again, using list, this time F3, we want to make sure that we got the right teacher. And teacher full name sorted. That's the one we want. Okay, but I also want to save the IDs of those. When we select a specific student or select a specific teacher, I want to make sure that the IDs of those student names, because names can change, or the ID of that teacher gets saved. So we can do that off the screen here. Let's say inside B9 and B10. So we're going to put in student ID here and teacher ID here. So to do that, all we need to do is just do equals if error, in case there's an error, wanted blank. So we're going to simply use an index. We're indexing, in this case, student ID. So we're going to look up the student ID. We're going to base it on a match. And what are we matching? We're matching based on the name. So that name here, we're going to base it on, again, so our student name. So student names here, and then what we're going to do is going to 0. We need an exact match. And also column is going to be 1. If there's an error, of course, I want to make sure that nothing is going to be shown. All right, so that's it. So student ID 11, let's double check that. Inside our student database here, we want to make sure that Brad Lopez is number 11. That's correct. That's what I want. I want that student ID. Okay, so back into the transactions, we're going to do something exactly the same for teachers. So equals if error, we're going to index, in this case, we're going to index teacher ID. We've already set that up as name range. And we're going to base it on a match. This time we're matching based on this teacher name here. And of course, the teacher full name here. So that's all we want. We've got some additional name range that we don't need. So 0. Also, what we want to do, comma, and now first column, and if there's an error, I'm just going to put double space. Okay, so Fredders, let's double check that to make sure that's correct. John Jacobs, J-O, that looks correct. So that's the correct ID. So let's just left justify that and then give it that same formula colors. We're also going to update some of the other fields we need. Obviously, this is not going to be exam row. I want to know the enter transaction name on the database. So this is going to be enter transaction name. So that means the database row based on the transaction name entered. Here's the transaction name. I want to know, we're going to use a named range on this. So I want to know exactly what row based on this name. I also want to know the transaction ID. So the user can enter transaction ID here. And I want to know the database row based on that. So we're going to put enter the entered transaction ID database row. So that's the one based on the ID. Then I want to have a transaction ID database row. So that means the row based on the loaded ID here. And then last up, we also want to have the next transaction ID, ID. Okay, very good. I like that. That's pretty much all we need. We're going to of course, we're going to update this. We'll change this to transaction ID. That's going to revert to 1 until we get a named range called transaction ID, which is fine. We don't have that yet. We'll be creating that very, very soon. All right, so that's pretty much it. Saving our work. We're going to update these. We will update the button sets. So keeping that similar, and let's move that over here a little bit. I think we'll update those so we can keep it a little bit smaller, but I think it's good now as it is. We'll update the button sets to a little bit closer in. All right, so what do we do now? Let's focus on the database. Again, we're going to use our data mapping, so all we need to do is take a screenshot of this, just like this here. Taking that screenshot, making sure to include the columns and the rows. We're going to copy that. Then I'm going to bring it inside the database, and we're going to create this transaction database. Right now it's empty. Then we'll create our named range based on those, and also we need sorted lists. So the first thing we are going to do is create those columns. We want the first column in column A, row 3, transaction ID. We also want inside B the transaction name here. We want to make sure we have a name on that. Or to save space, we can just call it name. It's a little bit easier. Obviously, it's transaction. And then next up, we want to have a date. Then I want to have an item. I want to know which item was used, an amount. I want to have the student ID. Save that, not only the student name, but the student ID. Then the student name. Then I want to have the teacher ID. Then I want to have the teacher name. So we've got all of those, and also I want to have the description, right? We have an exam. We'll change that to, of course, transaction description. And then also in K, I want to know the type and I want to know the category. The reason I want to bring that over is that when we run the dashboards, we can help that type and category is going to help category. So we've got that. And then also I want to have a list of sorted names. So maybe somewhere in here, I want to put sorted names. Again, I want to run based on the transaction name. So this one was going to be name. So, all right, so I got that. So I'm just going to call this name, and then we're going to have our list of names here sorted. Okay, so now let's do the data mapping. Relatively simple, just as we did before. We know that the transaction ID is going to be here in L5. So we can just put that in here in L5. And then in F5, we are going to put the name. F5 is where our name is going to go. I5 is the date is going to go. Then also what we want to do is we want to have the item that's going to come in, of course, F7. F7 is where our item is going to go. L7 is where our amount is going to come from. And then the student ID, that's going to be based on B. Remember column B. B9 is where our student ID is going to be. And then B10 is where the teacher ID is going to be. So we'll put in the teacher ID of B10. The student name is going to come directly from F9, and while the teacher name is going to come from K9. Okay, the descriptions all are going to come from E12. E12 is where the type and category, those are going to be H7, and of course we also want to make sure I7 is where the category is. Okay, now keep in mind that when we have both of these columns, this and this, that means it's going to be one directional. That means the information is going to come from our form and it's going to be placed in here, the type and the category. However, when I load this transaction, when I bring these values into this form, I am not going to add in this or this. Why is that? Because there's formulas. I don't want to erase those formulas. So that means we're going to be focused on equals column, the type and category. Column here, 11, and column 12, we want to make sure that we're not doing that. So all we need to do is run our loop when we're loading these in up to column 10, not including this, not when we're loading, only when we're saving. It's one directional. And keep that in mind, up to column 10. All right, so let's move it on. However, when we're saving it, it's going to go all the way to 12. We're good to go in that. Let's center these here, give them that color that we always do using the same principles here. And then also, let's just give this a color, a little bit of a color, just so we can see, although nobody will see this. Let's do transactions in green. Okay, and then border. All right, so we're going to merge and center this here, and we're going to call this transaction database. Nobody's going to see that, so it's just fine. All right, so that's good. That's just the way I like it. I'm going to center this, saving our work. We can now remove this. We're done with this screenshot, and we can start building out our code. And the easiest way to do that is simply to copy and paste what we have based on the transaction. So inside the transaction, let's update this. We're going to call this transaction description. All right, and then I'll left justify that here, and then we have everything good. All right, so we've got a teacher, we've got an amount. Let's put in amount here. We've got a transaction ID that's going to be cleared out. We're not going to need duplicate. We won't worry about duplicates in this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to clear the conditional formatting from that. So we're going to clear rows from the selected cells. So that's it. That's all we need to do. We don't need this formula here, but now what we want to do is we want to add some named ranges. We're going to add 3 different named ranges. So first one's going to be based on the ID, as we mentioned. The second one's going to be based on this name, and the last one's going to be based on this sorted name. So I'm just going to put in fees here, and I'm going to put in fees here, and then we'll create some named range based on that. So the first one is going to be the transaction ID here. So inside the formulas here, we're going to go in the name manager and new, and we're going to call it transaction ID. That's the right name we want. We're going to use offset just as we always do. So equals offset, just as we have 100 times before, comma 1 row down, comma count A. Then what we're going to be doing, again, also with the header row, using a large number 99, minus 1, excluding the header, comma 1. Tabbing over, tabbing out, making sure that it encompasses the data. I'm going to copy that, Control C, click OK. Next up, new, I want transaction, this time name. So I'm going to go down here and paste it in here. All I'm going to do is going to change out first column instead of A or B. We're going to use the same count, tabbing it out, tabbing over. So that's going to cover both of those. Click OK. One more I want to do, new, in this case, transaction, name, and then sorted. It's going to be based on the sorted. And I'm going to tab it over, paste it down here, and I'm going to make some updates on that. So this one's going to be based on column O. So starting with O2 in this case. So we're going to change this to O. We also need to change the count in this case, O2, and also this one's going to be also O2. So again, O2, and then we'll change the column under 2. So that's going to be it for that, and we'll tab out and tab back in to double check that to make sure it encompasses the data. Tab out, tab in, covers that. Okay, so this is going to be our sorted names. Clicking OK. All right, now we've got our named range set. I'm going to save our work as we always do, very common. Going back in here, we want to know the next transaction ID. That's correct, right? Notice we put in 2. We've got the next ID 1 and 2. The next one's going to be 3. So that's correct. What I want to do is I want to find the name based on this row. So we've got one called fees, and that's in row 4. So to do that, if we put in fees here, actually what we're going to do is we just need to do this. Need to add a data validation. So clicking on data validation. Going to click on list, and we're going to use equals. Okay, F3, we want to make sure we know the transaction. Take a look at that transaction here. We want to make sure it's name sorted. Click OK and click OK. So that's the one we want. So now we have fees. If I select fees, I want to know what row it is based on here. So equals, again here, if error, there's no, so we're going to do simply a match. Matching, what are we matching? I'm looking up the value. What am I looking up? This specific name. Where am I doing? I'm looking up based on the transaction name right here, and I want an exact match here. So then, of course, I'm going to simply add 3 because our first starts in row 3. If there's an error, then I want to just end it. Okay, so that's it. So that's going to give us 4. That's what I want. Now I want another one based on this. I want another one based on whatever transaction ID we've entered here. So going to do something very similar. Equals, if error, in this case, we are going to run a match, matching it based on what? This time we're looking up this, and we're basing it on the transaction ID here. We want an exact match here. And then again, also adding 3 here also. And then if it's an error, then go. Okay, so that's 4. So that was good. Now again, I want another one based on here. So this time it's going to be similar to this one, except we're going to use a different reference cell. So all I need to do is just paste in that instead of I3 in this case, we are simply going to use here L3. So that's it, 4. All right, good. I like that. The next transaction, everything is set. We've got all our formulas set. Now we're ready to code inside the VBA. All right, so let's get that done. We'll increase this column. We need a little more space here. Let's add a space in here as well. And we're good to go because we'll need a little bit more space for those specific names. Okay, so let's go into the VBA. Now, the best way to do that, because our exams and transactions are so similar, the best way to do that is just simply go in and copy and paste that code. So that's just what we're going to do now. Inside the developers here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this exam macros, but I want to create a brand new module here. So I'm going to right click, insert module, and we're going to call this, give it a name, go into the properties. And this time we're going to call it transaction macros. So there we go. We've named that module. Now we're going to go back into the exam macros here. I'm going to Control A and Control C. Then we're going back into that newly created one, transaction macros, Control A, and then paste that in there. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is customize this. So I'm going to do Control F. That's going to do a find. Then anywhere I find inside this module, only in the module, just in the module, anywhere that I find the word exam or exams, in fact, let's go exams. I'm going to start out with exams because that's the sheet name. So anywhere this exam sheet name, I'm going to replace it with transactions. So going back here, replace that with the word transactions. Okay, and then I'm going to do replace all. Now with 10, okay, 10's been replaced. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it from exam. I want to replace it to, in this case, I want to replace it to transactions, just the abbreviation, and replace all. And 71 replace them. Okay, good. That's perfect. So now we can go through and update that. So first thing what I want to do is we don't have a transaction browse tab. We don't have that macro. That's not necessary. So I'm just going to delete that. We don't need that. Okay, for the most part, we need everything else. So transaction save or update. We have transaction sort names, transactions add new, load, cancel new, delete. Perfect. So that's all we have. Now we just need to update this. So as far as our variables, we have transaction row, column, last row. That's good. We're good to go on that. We don't need much of a change on that. So transaction save or update. Let's take a look at our code. Let's split that down here. Bring that up here. We need to make some changes here and make the update. I want to make sure that we have a specific row. This specific row, B5, has to have a specific row. That's based on our transaction ID before we save it. All right, we do need to make sure that we don't have any empty fields. There's a lot of things. When we're saving, I want to make sure that we have a transaction name. I want a date. I want to make sure that we have an amount. Teachers and students are not required, but we certainly need an item. So we need a lot of these. So we need F5, I5. We need F7, and also we need L7. So we're going to check those to make sure that all those are not empty before. So again, we're going to make sure that F5 here, so we're going to do a lot more than just this F5. So let's go ahead and copy this here. F5 is empty, or another one, or we got 4, or, so we got 4 of them, right? So we can make sure there. So it's going to be F5. We also need to make sure that it's I5, which is the transaction date if I5 is empty. Also, we want to make sure that F7, the item, is not empty. We also want to make sure that L7 is not. So F7 and L7, those cannot be empty. So they are required for transactions. So F7 here, and then L7 all the way over here. So L7 cannot be empty. Let's change this to I5 here. Let's change this to F7 here, and then we're going to change this to L7 here. So all those fields, if any of those fields, please make sure to add, let's update that. Please make sure to include transaction name, date, item, and amount. These are required fields. So we can use the same one for all of them. Okay, exit sub. Now what I want to do is I want to determine if we have a unique transaction or not. That's not important because we're going to allow transactions, so we got to spell unique wrong. Let me just go in here. Before I forget, let's go back into exam macros, and I spelled this wrong. I forgot an E at the end of the unique, so otherwise you guys are going to call me out on that. So saving our work in, let's go back into the transaction macros and we'll continue on. So what I want to do is I want to determine, is it new or is it existing? We know this. If there's no row attached to B5, we know it's an existing, right? As soon as we clear this out, we know that B5 is going to be new. So B5 is going to tell us whether it's new or existing. So we can update the code accordingly inside that. If B5 equals empty, then it's a new transaction. That's fine. The transaction row is going to be based on the transaction database, the first available row. That's good. We're going to take the transaction and we're going to be coming from B6. That's good, right? B6 for new transactions. So we don't need to make updates there. And also else existing B5 is going to take on the transaction row. Perfect. So there's no changes here that we need. Now we do need to update this. When we're saving it, remember, we're going to go all the way to, in this case, 12, right? Our last column in this case is 12 here. So we do want to save the type and category. We just don't want to load them. So our last column in this case is 12. So that's the update that we want to make there. So we're going to update that. So the transaction row, transaction column, everything looks good. Place data in the database, next transaction. Existing transaction group, perfect. Transaction short names. Okay, good. So everything looks good. So how much easier it is to update it. So now we've copied and pasted it. Sorting names are going to make a few different changes on here. So the first thing we want to do when we clear out any existing ones, we need to make sure that let's update this a little bit, make it look a little bit better, more professional here. So let's add in some center that. Okay, I like that there. So basically I want to clear out 03 all the way down. So any results there that we're going to, when we run that, so instead of J3, it's O3. We want to clear out O3 all the way to O. So we're going to clear any previous results. Clear previous results. So now we're going to determine the last row. That's based on A, current, based on the transaction database, correct. Last four is less than rogue, that's good. On error, we want to delete any criteria because there's no criteria. We want to run advanced filter. A3, B3 is fine because we're only going to the name. This time we're going to have the results appear in O, in this case O2, O, not J. And then also the last results we're going to be based on O. If the last results are less than 4, why 4? Because we don't need to sort. If I have just one value here, there's nothing to sort. Only if we have results from 4 and on do we actually need to sort. So that's fine the way that is right there. So once we do sort, we're going to, of course, base it on O, not J. In this case, O3 all the way through O. So we're just updating that column there. Much easier when we copy and paste. Okay, we're going to do it ascending. Saving our work. Always save it. Transaction data and the add new. Let's take a look at this. Add new transaction data. This time we need to create a named range for transaction data. Let's do that right now. So again, I'm going to hold down the control. I'm going to highlight everything that I want. Not these formulas, right? Just these fields here. Holding down this. Then what I'm going to do is create a named range. Call it transaction data. Then I'm going to update that. I need to update that. So if we look at that, we select transaction data one more time here, we need to make sure that we update for the merged cells. So inside the formulas name manager, transaction data, we're going to go into the one we just created, and we're going to make some updates based on those merged cells. So let's take a look at that. Inside that, the first one we have is going to be based on F9 through H9, F9 through H9. That's going to be for the student names. So we're just going to look it up here, bring it all the way over here, make sure that we have all the F9 and then colon H9, and we're going to use F4. Okay, the second one's the teacher name, and that's going to be based on J9 all the way through L9. So J9 through L9, colon L9, and then F4. And then the last one's going to be based on our description. So colon E12, and that's going to go all the way here to L13. So colon L13. And then lastly, F4. So now we've got our name range. Tab out, tab back in, make sure that we've encompassed all the data. That looks right. Update that and click, double check that, make sure we have it right. That looks good, click close. Okay, so now we have our transaction data. So let's go back into that and make sure. So we have our transaction data. When we clear our existing transaction group, that looks good. Double check our names to make sure that we have in our selection pane, make sure we have existing transaction group, new transaction group, making sure that the spelling is correct on those just to double check. It's always good to double check. Okay, so we have that. All right, perfect. So the transaction load, when we're loading a transaction, I want to make sure not B3 that's empty. This time I want to make sure that B5 is not empty. That's our row that we're going to be focused on. And I'll show you why that's important, because that's the reason is this, B5. When I change this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to determine the ID based on this row or this row, whatever that ID is. So for example, I'm going to look in here using VB. I'm going to determine the transaction ID using whatever row in column A1. I'm going to take that transaction ID and I'm going to place it directly in here inside the change event. Once I place that ID here, it's going to change that row here. As long as there's a row here, I know we have a proper transaction. So all we need to do is just check to make sure that B5 is a value. So B5 is empty. Please select correct transaction. We can update that from the drop-down list. Okay, so the transaction row again is going to be based on B5. Okay, so that's the transaction row. And then what we're going to update, remember, we're only loading up to 10, not 12, because these are formulas. This is column 11. This is column 12. I don't want to change these formulas. I don't want to load that in. I don't want to change it. All right, so we have that there. So it's only going to go up to 10. Going to transaction database. Everything is good here. Existing, everything is good here. All right, I like that. Cancel new. Again, in this case, I'm going to use O3. The transaction database based on O3. It's the first value. And we're going to update. What I'm going to update? I'm going to update F3. So F3 is correct on that, but I do want to make it's coming from O3 and not J3. All right, as far as delete's concerned, right? Are you sure you want to delete this transaction? We can update that transaction. Yes or no, delete transaction, change that. And then exit sub. If B5, that's our row, it's empty, then please make sure you select a transaction to delete. Okay, good. So now the transaction is going to be based on B5, D7. In this case, we can go all the way to 12. We're actually going to go all the way. We can delete everything up to 12. Transaction based on the transaction database, that's what we want. And we're going to clear the contents one by one. Transaction short names, rerun it, and rerun this. All right, that looks good. You see how quick that is? Of course, we'll have to fix some errors if there are any errors, but we're going to now assign those macros to these buttons. All right, so let's do that here. This one particularly, I'm going to hold down the control on new transaction. I'm going to assign the macro here. Click down transaction, add new. That's the one I want. And then this one, update here. You can see that. Again, that's going to be the save update transaction, so we'll assign the macro. That's going to be the same one for both update and save for both the save button. This one behind here, and then delete transaction. That's a little bit stretched out. We'll fix that. Update that. Assign the macro again. Transaction, delete here. That's the one I want. Transaction load, we're going to write that macro soon. So when I click new transaction, it's going to clear everything out. I'm going to bring this down here. We don't need this all the way over there. And then we'll update the macro. So cancel new. I'm going to bring this icon up, update this a little bit, bring this icon a little bit to the left here. All right, so cancel new, and I want to assign the macro to this particular button and the icon here. Again, signing the macro transaction and then cancel new. Down here, cancel new, that's the one we want. Good. And then also save transaction, making sure that's already assigned. Or we just hover the mouse, make sure it's so. All right, so good. We've got that. Now what I want to do is when I make a change here, I want that transaction to load here. Or when I enter that transaction ID, I want it to load here. So how are we going to do that? It's going to be based on the change event, F3 or I3. So let's write that in right now, that change event. So we're going to go directly inside the transaction screen right here. And then it's going to be based on the worksheet change event. So change event, we're not going to use anything with selection, so we can get rid of that. So if, let's just do the if target dot count large, making sure is greater than, let's say 5, then that prevents errors, exit sub. Okay, so first of all, we're going to base it on F3, right? If they're changing a name F3, I want to make sure that F3 is not blank, and range F3 dot value is not empty, does not equal empty. And I also want to make sure one other thing. I want to make sure when we make a change here, I want to make sure that B3 is not empty too. I want to make sure that when we enter that, I want to make sure, oh no, I'm not finished with you yet, hang on. I want to make sure that there's a row here. So we want to make sure that B3 is not empty as well. So let's update that as well. So making sure that and range B3 dot value does not equal empty. Then, okay, then what are we going to do? Then when I want to do something, what I want to do, I want to determine, and we know that there's a row here. I want to take whatever ID is in column A, row 4 of the transaction database, that, and I want to place it directly inside here into L5. So we can do that with a single line of code. So we could do range L5 dot value equals transaction database dot range A, and where's the row? The row is based located in B3. Range B3, that's where the row is, dot value, dot value. Okay, so that's it. And then all we need to do is load the transaction. Transaction load. So that's good. I like that. Let's save our work. And so basically all we're going to do is determine the row. And then all we're going to do is determine, okay, so if it's 1, we're going to simply take whatever is located in A in the row here and place it directly inside here. Once it is in here, once I change that, then we get a row here in 5, and we can load it accordingly. All right, so that's all we need to do, and then we're going to clear data. I want to do the same thing or similar for an I, although when user enters I want to check in this case to make sure that there. So if they enter 1 here, I'm going to check to make sure that B4 is, and if B4 is, then we're going to take whatever's in B4 and load it in here. So I know I'm moving fast, but it's a little bit of a duplicate. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it down here. This I'm going to, let's just add a description here on transaction name change. Transaction name change. And this on transaction ID change. On transaction ID change. So I like that. All right, so now that we have that, so instead of F3, right, when this one's going to be I3. So we're going to update this to I3. This one's going to be I3, and this one's going to be B4. B4 is our rows that's concerned about that. So when we do that, as long as B4 is not empty, then we're going to take whatever's in B4 and place it in here. So it's much easier. So that's ID change. So that's a search ID. So that's it. So all we need to do is update that. Okay, let's save our work again. So what we want to do is now just clear out the database and add some figures in here and make sure that everything's working correctly. All right, so we're going to clear out this data, and then I'm just going to clear this out. We don't need this. I'm going to add our first data in. So transaction here, we've got our next transaction as 1 transaction. Let's just put in, let's say school fees and put in a transaction date. I'll format this accordingly. I want to use a short date on that. So do a short date here on that. The transaction ID is empty because it's a new. We'll put in a transaction school fee, amount of 150. And then we'll assign, I'm going to assign both a student and a teacher just to make sure to check for data. Normally you wouldn't do both. Okay, so let's just put test description here. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to save that transaction. And we're going to take a look inside our database and make sure that everything got saved here. All right, I think we need to update this. Take a look at this, assign macro. Notice that the macro is still assigned, is still exam save. We don't want that, obviously. So we just need to update the macro on this. And the icon here, I'm going to make sure that's transaction save, assign the macro. Transaction save or update, that's the one I want. And then we're good to go on that. Okay, click OK, save the transaction. There we go, transaction, it looks good. That's a little bit off we'll worry about those buttons in a bit, not too important there. Okay, so we've got the name, the date, school fees, the amount, student ID, student name, teacher ID, teacher name, we need to update, that didn't work. And then the description type, so the teacher name, that's I believe J, not K, J, right? Okay, so we just want to make sure that transaction here, it's going to be J, right? J9, not K9. Okay, update that, make sure the teacher went in the proper place. There we go. Now we got it. All right, everything looks good. We've got our name sorted. Let's add one more just to make sure. We click new transaction. Everything got cleared out. Put in a transaction name. Let's just put Abe's expense, anything there, and then put in a date here. Then also, again, transaction, I'll just put in any kind of a, let's see, school fee here. I'll put in another one, lesson here. And then I'll put in a expense there. Then I'll put in a teacher and a student just for a sample, and then put an amount here. Anything will work, and then test. Okay, so just want to make sure that we have enough data in here. Save the transaction. Going back, I want to make sure that our drop-down list contains both Abe's and expenses, and they're sorted accordingly. So when I click on Abe's or I click on school fees, it all automatically sorts. If I want to enter a transaction or enter, that's already correct. And let's put in number 2. I want to make sure that that loads up too. Okay, good. You see it's loading up very, very nicely. That's just the way I know. I'm going to format this. There's one other thing I want to make sure we do, and that's on the exams. We got to update the schedule. If we remember correctly, let's go back and do exams. We see here we've got a data drop-down list. So I'm going to copy that. In the scheduling, we have to assign an exam. Back in the schedule, remember we had add exam for students? I'm going to paste that, paste special, and then paste the validation. Because now we have to be able to assign exams. We didn't have that before, but now we do. So when we assign exams, we can now assign that, and then we assign the scores to that. So we can now when we do that, when we assign a specific score, we can now assign that exam as well, the the exam, and the score because we have a drop-down list. All right, very, very cool. I'm glad we got to that. I think we're good to go on this. Thank you so much. Next week, we've got a brand new training on the School Manager. Just a few weeks left. We got Share and Seek, we've got dashboards, and a few other amazing trainings. I cannot wait to share it to you. Of course, we've got really cool notifications coming up. You won't want to miss it. If you do like these trainings, I appreciate it. We've got a $7 promotion on our mentorship. That's going to get you 5 weeks at 8 hours of training, an incredible deal for just $7. That'll get you started on the mentorship program. I really hope you'll join us there. Thanks so much for your likes, shares, and your comments. I appreciate it all and your support. We'll see you next week.